Hello and welcome back to Take Flight Podcast. This is episode 185 with myself, Daniel, Pabilo, Shuel, and Olu. In today's episode, it's no secret that professional sports have become a multi-billion-dollar industry, with athletes serving as the gladiators of our time, pushing their bodies to the limits while captivating our imaginations. Every year, we witness these modern-day warriors competing at the highest level, representing their respective sports with passion and skill. But beyond the thrill of the game itself, there's a fascinating element that often catches our attention: the financial reward that comes with being the best of the best. Today, we're here to unpack the intriguing question: who are the athletes who have ascended to the pinnacle of sports stardom and achieved the highest earnings so far in 2023? It's an ever evolving landscape with endorsement deals, lucrative contracts, and global reach playing pivotal roles in shaping the financial fortunes of these luxury individuals. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
So guys, you heard the opening of this week's episode, but before we kind of get into sort of athletes and what their earnings are so far in this year, have been this year rather, let's do a quick roundhouse of how everyone is doing. I'm going to go immediately to above. So sure, we'll start with you. How you been? How you been since the last time we recorded? What have you been up to?
Yes, all good, Daniel. Thank you. It's great to see you and the guys again. It's been a big week. I had my graduation ceremony at Cambridge. So that was a really big family event. We had 3 days in Cambridge together. It was first time for my parents to come visit the city, and my wife as well came along, as well as my two younger brothers. So it was a really great couple of days. Emotional, a lot of food, a lot of walking as well. But I really treasured experience, and then also a good chance to have a send off with my amazing classmates as well. So overall a 10 out of 10 week. And yeah, now I think I've got enough frameworks and theories to last me at least a few more years before I go into something like that again. But yeah, overall it's been really good.
I think that deserves a huge round of applause. You know, an MBA is no feat. They're definitely MBAs definitely aren't a scam. So round of applause.
Yeah, don't let the clips trick you. Don't let the clips trick you. MBAs are very priceless. So make sure to check that episode out if you, in case you haven't. Actually, with that, Olu, how are you on your end?
I'm good, thanks. Firstly, congratulations, Shual. I think every single one of us are so proud of you. Feels like yesterday you started, so fantastic. Myself, I was in Paris over the weekend, so I was there for work, and then I ended up staying over in Paris as well. I went to an art exhibition, a Basquiat exhibition, which was a lot of fun.
Did you buy a
Um,
piece, by the way, Mr. CFO money, or not?
Unfortunately, it was outside of my tax bracket. Um, but hopefully, if I play it right with properties and mortgages and all of that stuff, I'll potentially be able to afford an art exhibition
I
or
heard
art piece.
I heard Skipton's got a decent one, but you gotta check that with P.
Thanks, appreciate it. But yeah, it was a great weekend. It was a great weekend. But on that note, why don't we pass it on to P? How are you been? What's the market saying?
Yeah, I'm all good. It's been a great week. Dan, how you been?
Wow, that was quick. I had myself on mute. Wow. I wasn't ready for that quick flip of the question. Please, that it.
Yeah, all
Anything more
good.
to add, Pete?
As always. I'm well. Family's great. It's the same with me, So yeah, Dan, how you been?
Oh wow, I wasn't ready so quickly. Yeah, I'm well. I'm good, thank you. I spent the last week in the States. Started the week off in New York, and then headed to Atlanta end of the week to spend some time with family and friends before coming back to the UK. Fortunately, no long trip back like last month. Going via LA, but I did have a bit of a scare when I got a text to say that my flight was delayed by an hour. I thought it was going to be the same old saga that I experienced 2 weeks prior, but fortunately not, and made up some time in the air. But apart from that, all good. Good to be back with the family, spend time with the family, see my son, see my wife as well. So yeah, all good. Okay, so this episode I thought would be great to really talk about athletes. The reason I chose this topic were, I think, twofold. One, because I saw an article published by Forbes at the beginning of May around the highest paid athletes, and then second is I think there's a sort of I would say prejudice given, or we are in our thinking somewhat negative towards footballers individually in this country. Sorry, I say that because when we see players sign a deal for X amount a week. Like we've seen Bukayo Saka just sign a new deal with Arsenal, I think for a reported 300,000 a week. Now, everyone comments his on-field ability, but when people are getting paid, such amounts, people tend to, frown upon it and compare it to maybe, oh look, there's extreme cost of living crisis. And anyway, that aside, people always seem to the price that they're being paid always seems to have a negative impact off the field. So I thought it'd be good just to maybe have a conversation on this, because of course they work very hard. We see them as playing football. Yes, whilst they may love what they do, and everyone always says if you love the job you do, you never work in your life. But we also don't think about the times they're not working. So we think they're playing a match, but they're actually on a Sunday at 4 o'clock. They're actually going to work. They're going to work throughout the week. When they're training, it's not training, it's actually work. But I thought we could just unpack this along with some other sports. So I thought, I would start and set the scene to sort of highlight the current list of the highest paid athletes across different sports and leagues around the world, and also the factors that contribute to their high earnings, such as endorsement deals, prize money, and of course their salary. So to start with, I'll just go from 1 to 10 to make it very simple. At number 1, it's maybe surprised, may not be, but at 136 million for 2023 is footballer Cristiano Ronaldo. His salary on field is 46 million. These are all going to be in dollars, by the way, $46 million. And off the field, it's $90 million. He's 38 years old. At number 2, it's many will say his rival, Lionel Messi, at 130 million, so 6 million shy of Cristiano. His on-field salary, or on-field earnings rather, is 65 million. Off the field, equally 65 million, and he's 35. Number 3 is French international Kylian Mbappe. On-field earnings at 100 million, off-field earnings 20 million, and he's 24. I think he's the highest paid athlete in the world when it comes to on-field earnings, and also one of the youngest overall in terms of his earnings globally. Number 4 is the recent player who lost in the NBA series finals, LeBron James, at 119.5 million. His on-field earnings are 44.5, off-field 75, and he is 38. Number 5 is Saul Canelo Alvarez, 110 million. He's a boxer, if anyone doesn't know. Famously fought Floyd Mayweather at the tender age of 21, I believe. His on-field earnings are 100 million, off-field 10 million. He's 32 and Mexican. At number 6, it's Dustin Johnson, no relation to me. Otherwise, I'll not be doing this podcast. I'll be living off the fat of the land. At 107 million. On-field earnings, surprisingly, 102 million. And off-field, 5 million. He's from the United States and 38. At number 7, also from the US, is Phil Mickelson. 104 million on-field. Off-field, 2 million. Nationality, US, as I just said, and he's 52. I don't know if I've mentioned, but Dustin Johnson and also Phil Mickelson both play golf. At number 8, Steph Curry, 100.4 million. On-field earnings, 48.4 and off-field 52. Basketball player, US and 35. At number 9, one of the greats of the sport of tennis, 95.1 million is Roger Federer. On-field earnings, 0.1 million. Off-field 95, surprisingly, shockingly high. He's Swiss and 41. And at number 10, someone who I had the pleasure of watching play basketball in March this year is Kevin Durant of the Phoenix Suns. 89.1 million is his total earnings. Off-field 44.1, off-field 45 million, and he's 34. One thing I'll say with the off-field earnings, it includes endorsements, but also any investment deals that they've done. So a lot of these athletes that I've mentioned do investments on the side. So, for example, LeBron James, he invests a lot on the side. Roger Federer, he invests. Also, Kevin Durant invests a lot as well. But one thing that stood out to me was the 2 golf players, actually, that both of their on-field earnings are over 100 million and the off-field are very small, which makes me think, the earnings and prize money in golf is very, very lucrative. But it's also, I think we'll get into the sort of disparity across sports later on in this episode. Now that I've said that, I thought it would be good to open up the conversation around the disparity or the wealth disparities between different sports and leagues, as I was just alluding to, and comparing the salaries of endorsements. So I think we'll just kind of go around, maybe touch on 1 or 2 points, from based off what I said, and also maybe some research you've done also yourself. So Pete, to start us off with, what would you highlight in the earnings from the players I've mentioned, and also the earnings across different sports globally?
Yeah, sure. Actually, just before I dive into that precise question, I wanted to come back to your earlier opening statement around, I guess, the stigma that athletes face in terms of when their earnings are released. And I think it's very important for us all to understand, and we know, and also to the listeners, you are paid, relative to how many people can actually do what you do. So we are talking about very rare talents that are in many cases of one of one. The second thing, also, we also can't forget that these athletes have been dedicating themselves to this particular sport since the age of 3 or 5. So I know there's always been a conversation around teachers should get paid more, right, or things of that nature. But when you think about someone who's dedicated themselves to a craft, one particular craft, day in and day out, for 5 to 7 days a week, since the age of 3 until now, or for 25 years, then it starts to, I think that conversation should also be put in the context of what that person earns. And I think the other thing to say, and more particular with the football field, is their career span is very short. So they're not earning a lot of money for a period of time. So I think it's important to mention that, and not just, people see the numbers and they think, oh, it's unfair, right? Anyone can kick a ball on a football pitch, and it's not quite the case. So my takeaway when I saw that list, what you're seeing is the top three slots being taken by football, which is quite interesting. And I think especially on that third slot, that's very much driven, Kylian Mbappe, very much driven by foreign investments and new capital coming into that league that perhaps wasn't there before. So, what effect has that had on the league, and also moving forward? But no surprise to see basketball, also golf. I think what's interesting, we can bring out at a later stage, is the all-time list, and how that list ranks compared to what we see now. But I think you definitely are starting to see football sort of emerging in the ranks and holding on those sort of top 3, top 5 slots.
Thanks for that, P. And yeah, you definitely highlighted the word I was looking for earlier, which is the stigma associated with the high earnings of footballers. Ollie, what would your perspective be on this?
Yeah, I think great points by P. The only thing I'll add is what dictates how much a lot of these athletes are paid is based on the revenue in which the sports in which they play generates. So if you look across the board, right, and that's where I started. I first said, let me look at, out of all the different leagues and professional sports, what is the revenue generated from them? So the top of it is NFL, so American football, at 17 billion. Then the next one is Major League Baseball, which was at 10 billion. Then you've got basketball at around 9.5, and then you got the Premier League at 6 billion, right? So initially I thought, okay, I would expect to see NFL players on the top of that list. But then I thought, let me drill down and think of it from another angle. Out of those sports that I've named and leagues I've mentioned, which one has more global reach? And it's football, right? A lot of those ones that we talked about that have high revenue are very American focused. Yes, they will have people watching maybe the Super Bowl final, but you don't really get much people all over the world maybe tuning in for regular season games of the NFL versus football. You've got the Spanish league, you've got the French league, it's all over the world, World Cup, etc. So that's why I'm not really surprised as the top three on that list, them being football related or soccer for any of our American listeners out there. Then the second part of this is how important the split between sort of the salary and endorsements become, right? P's mentioned a lot of these people have dedicated their lives to this, right? They become the best, in some cases, LeBron James, one of one, right? Generational talent. And when you become that big or that talented at your field, your brand, your image starts to um, oversees or precede your sort of your salary and what you're making on a daily basis. Like you as an entity is a lot larger. So then that's when the endorsement element of it starts to, and the off-field element of it starts to make a big influence on you. So yeah, those are sort of the 2 points I sort of noticed. Was one, why were soccer and football plays at the top of the list, because it's a global sport. And then secondly, the split between salary, on-field and off-field endorsements split. And it's mainly due to talent, brand, and years in a particular sport.
Thanks. I don't think we've got that global reach, so we're definitely going to keep this football with the one that you play with your feet, not soccer. But yeah, yeah, Pete,
But
so
it
you're
does.
going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to just add to great points also, Olu, you mentioned. It does ask the question, why are NFL players not paid maybe as well as they should relative to how much the sport generates, even though it's not as much of a global reach as maybe the football in that sense, and how the World Cup spreads. Because I've just
But could you then? I don't know NFL too detailed, but also I know that NFL teams are a lot bigger. So in the overall kind of roster spend, it might actually equate to a Premier League team or something. So where you might have 30, 40 players, you know, on like 10-year contracts as well. You also, and also, I'm not sure on like the setup of insurance, whether they pay out insurance and, you know, their players are insured. So they might have a very different structure to how it is in the Premier League.
So what I find on that list, and I think we're probably going to publish that Forbes list, is if you look just at the on-field salary, you've got certain people like Russell Wilson, which is earning like 72 million, which will then bring him in sort of the top 5, top 10 level.
But it's the endorsement.
But the endorsement element, because of the fact that they're very US focused, someone in Malaysia might not know who they are.
And no, I love that point, because what's interesting about the data is that when you look at the endorsement deals for the NFL, of course, they're top in terms of the number of brands associated with the NFL compared to the NBA or MLB. NFL has actually 2 billion of endorsement revenue coming into the league, so twice as much as the NBA. But to your point, you got Russell Wilson making 72 million on field, not so much off field. So it's very interesting in terms of how contracts are structured, and of course the weighting of teams. The last thing I wanted to mention before I hand it to Shuel is coming back a little bit to the point I mentioned earlier. I still actually think, even though these numbers to the average person seem astronomical, I think in many cases a lot of players are underpaid, because how do you equate the value that they bring to their team? We've all seen cases where a player transfers to, for example, Real Madrid, and within that 7 days they've been able to make up their transfer in shirt sales. LeBron James goes to Cleveland, and I think it was estimated that he brings, you know, close to like hundreds of millions of dollars to the town from economic standpoint. So it's the question comes down to that whole, you know, it's the job salary versus, you know, that equity piece, which we'll get into at some point.
And I think
Yeah,
that
sure.
also brings the point. That's what I was going to say. That also brings the point of brand image, which we'll get into in a moment. I think brand image is very important when it comes to athletes. But even just structuring those contracts, you know, if I was LeBron, I'll ask for like a percentage of shirt sales, because boy, if you don't ask, you don't get. But sorry, Shuel, over to you.
Before Shuel goes on, maybe the reason why some of these NFL players are not there is, remember when crypto was such a big thing? I know a lot of them took their salary in crypto.
Odell Beckham Jr.
Beckham. So maybe that put them further down in the list.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think actually it's the points I had is actually a good build on the discussion, because I think Daniel gave a good framing of the individual players, and then obviously we've had the discussion around the leagues. I think the data point that I was looking at is more at the overall league level, which are the sports leagues that are generating the most amount of revenue at the top of the funnel before we go into individual players and sponsorships. And it actually surprised me, because I think a lot of us look at how much the US is obsessed with NFL and how they think it's like the biggest sport in the world, but it hasn't really translated across other geographies across the globe outside of the US, maybe outside of Canada. But actually, if you look at the amount that it's revenue generating as a league, it's based on this source, $16 billion, which is actually the highest generating revenue sports league in the world. So if the NFL is number one at 16 billion, number two is the Indian Premier League, which is actually the cricket league that has only been relatively new compared to the NFL. It's only in decades rather than a multi-decade league. This is around the 10 billion range. And then Major League Baseball is around just under 11 billion. So already the top three if you add the fourth, would be NBA. So the top 4 leagues in terms of generating the most amount of revenue overall for a league are all US, apart from the IPL, which is obviously an Indian cricket league. The Premier League comes in at number 5, and that's at 5 billion. So that's half the amount of what the MLB is generating and a third of what the NFL is generating. So I was thinking actually more the economics, how that then translates to the next step, where if those leagues are generating the most amount of money, then the owners are probably getting very wealthy from owning clubs. There's probably a lot of advertising. We know the US is very big on marketing, so a lot of that revenue is also coming through. But then if you translate that to the list that Daniel shared and the discussion that we've had on a per player basis, you don't see all the volume of NFL, Major League Baseball players coming through, even NBA, apart from the big ones that we mentioned. So I think my reflection was that these leagues are generating the most amount of money, but in terms of a player basis, that money clearly isn't going down to the players because of multiple factors. But from a league standpoint, you can see why advertisers are focusing behind the bigger American leagues and why, as a country, they can generate so much money behind it.
No, I agree with those points, and thanks for giving the context of the overall global sorts of leagues in before we go into the players. And P mentioned a point earlier about foreign investment. When you look at Kylian Mbappe, PSG, which has a lot of overseas investment, they can now afford to pay such high wages and such high salaries. And then when you look at the Premier League, for example, Manchester City, which in 2010, 2011 had overseas investment, you've seen the fruit it's yielded. They're on course for a treble this year. So you can definitely see how that has an element to be able to attract the best players and also to pay higher salaries. Also, Chelsea were bought last year, and Manchester United are also in talks of being sold by the Glazers. So it's very, very interesting to see how this landscape is going to play out. But also, you see that a lot of these American, owners are very, very wealthy. Some of them just have these other, teams that they own for fun. I just are a cash cow and funnel. For example, the Arsenal owner doesn't really, I think it's fair to say, compared to his other investments and his other businesses, Arsenal's probably the least one he cares about because he makes billions in the US from his sports franchises alone. But I thought we can move over to sort of endorsements. And I think when we look at the on-field salaries, yes, they're definitely not numbers that are minuscule, very, very healthy numbers. But we also see that the off-field endorsements and where they get their earnings from is similarly as important. And I thought we could sort of just spend a few moments about how athletes can leverage their on-field success and personal brand to secure lucrative endorsements. And what does this impact have on their overall income? Just to quickly point out, I'll start off with Cristiano Ronaldo, and I'll let the three of you go and to explore other athletes and other leagues as well. When you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, it's definitely fair to say he's got a global reach. I believe he's the most followed person on Instagram with over, I think, 500 million views. 500 million followers, if I recall correctly. And this is a guy who takes pride in his image, who loves the work he does, is passionate about the work he does, and is very, very, I would say, even obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at him as an individual, what he's achieved over the last 15 years or 20 years, let's say, he's been someone who's very, very much, as P alluded to earlier, dedicates time into his work. I recall reading an interview or hearing an interview years ago how he would practice his free kicks. When everyone's gone in, he's still out on the field practicing his free kicks. I think maybe he should have done a bit more practice because his free kicks now aren't, having a long-lasting effect. But let's be real. At 38, he's in very, very good shape. Very good shape. And I think he warrants, I won't say I think, whether he warrants what he gets paid, I don't know. But definitely moving from the Premier League and Manchester United, where he fell out of place with the management, the coaching staff, etc., to move into the Saudi league. What he's been able to do, not only did he generate millions for Manchester United, because I bought a number 7 Ronaldo shirt, but he did that for Manchester United. I would say he brought a lot of excitement an injection into the Premier League. I think even with that year when he joined, whether you're a Manchester United player or not, you wanted to watch him because you thought, I want to see this man live in a stadium at least once in my life. He might not be in his prime, but at least he's going to be entertaining. They're moving to the Saudi League, now putting the Saudi football on the map. The teams that no one had ever heard of. I think, the only guy I knew the Saudi Al Nassr team was Abubakar for, is it Cameroon? That was bodying up the World Cup. My guy's 24, but looks like he's 50. But anyway,
Nah,
he was battling
Gustavo's
up the
there.
World
Luis
Cup.
Gustavo. Don't disrespect it. Gustavo.
but to put it this way, I didn't know any players like that. But then when Ronaldo joined, they flew out the whole family on a private jet. They had like an opening ceremony for him when he signed to come out on the pitch before he even played, and they made it a spectacle. And there are, rumors that Messi might move over to a rival team as well. So it's really interesting just to see what your personal brand, how you value self, can also attract sponsorship deals. Ronaldo has how many deals with Nike, with crypto firms, Binance, I think LiveScore. This guy can just about speak English, but he's still doing adverts in English, and then he will get millions for it. So it's crazy just how much your presence, your reach on social media nowadays can have an impact on how much you can ask for. Because if you've got over 500 million followers, well, this one clip is going to get X amount of views. I'm going to have influence over those people. So it's just interesting to see the rise of social media, how this can play a part in off-field endorsements, not to mention their personal investments. But yeah, I thought that's just kind of my quick take on this. I'll head over to you, to you, Olu, on who you want to share.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in the NBA, so along the lines of basketball. So I've actually watched a really good movie called Air, which is based on or story about Michael Jordan and the story of his mom and how she negotiated his endorsement deal with Nike, right? With the Jordan brand, etc. Right? If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend you watch it. But because we're looking at sort of current athletes, I'm going to focus on LeBron James, right? The first element, and I think whenever we talk about this endorsement for any sport, any athlete, starts with talent, right? You need to be talented. Yeah. You can't be the average player on your team. You can't even just only be the best player in your team. You need to be the best player or one of the top players in the sport to be able to generate the large endorsement deals that we're talking about. Then the second element, so after you've built your brand over your talent, the way you carry yourself, your image, especially if you're able to translate that image to what I call more family safe household names, right? That also helps. Like someone like LeBron James, he's been in the league for such a long time, being the number one draft, talented from such a young age. He's been the poster boy, right? He hasn't done anything controversial when it comes to his image or his brand. The next thing, which is I think, or two elements, which are my last 2 points, which is really critical. One is the negotiation element of it, right? You've seen in multiple sports, they're not happy with just cash up front. They need to either get royalties, stocks, dividends. If it's some sort of royalty payment per shoe or per whatever product is being sold, a percentage of whatever product is being sold, they need to make sure that it's tied into the success of that particular product, right? Which is critical. And then I would say my last point. So one, making sure you're renegotiating or you're negotiating those deals to make sure that they're royalty equity based. And then most importantly, investing the money that you have when you make that endorsements or investing in those brands. LeBron James done it with Nike, right? I think Steph Curry did it with Under Armour, right? It's instead of just giving me a check, give me equity. Let me invest on that side. So those are really what I sort of took when I thought about the endorsement element. But I'll pass it on to P or Shual.
Yeah, so actually, I'll be happy to jump in after Olu because I think the person that I was thinking of in category complements it quite well. The person that I wanted to highlight was actually Bronny James, who is the child of LeBron James. And the reason why I wanted to highlight him in terms of endorsements is that with his recent agreement to join a Californian university in America, he signed a deal for $5.9 million, which makes him the highest paid college athlete in US sports ever. And that's only because it was only in recent years that they changed the laws and legislations where college athletes could actually cash in on their personal brand. Now, Bronny obviously is the eldest son of LeBron James, who Olu just talked about. But already at a young age, he's got deals with Nike, with Beats by Dre, and even an underwear company. And I think it speaks to a broader point that in this generation where we have TikTok, YouTube, you have sports players creating podcasts, or they're still playing at the same time rather than doing it as a post-retirement activity. The opportunity is really there where if you can really strategically create this personal brand behind you that's authentic, that people seem to gravitate towards, then these sponsorship deals I can only imagine going one direction, and that's up. So college sports is a small example, but I think it represents the opportunity that is really growing across all sports, even if you're the son of a famous sports star. So that was the example I wanted to share. P, should we go to you?
Yeah, no, just really aligned actually with the points that you guys have shared. And I think the when it comes to endorsements, the key word that comes to mind is leverage. And Olu's mentioned these points. You are in a position to leverage when when you've delivered on your talent and you've won championships. And Olu, you mentioned a documentary about Air. There's actually another documentary on Netflix called Money. And one of the examples on that documentary was about Michael Jordan and his rise to the number one spot in terms of all-time highest paid all-time athletes, and he's number one at 3.3 billion. And the message there was he made he made millions from his labor, but he made billions from equity and capital. So one of the other key things that comes out from conversation around endorsements is that no matter what your field is, your biggest payday will never come from your job, because let's not forget that these guys are working. It's their job. It's a great job, right? If you're talented, and so it's no surprise that a lot of the off-field amount of money and what they can actually earn in their lifetime is a lot more than what they've been able to earn on their actual on their actual playing time. So I think it's just keyword is leverage. Olu and Shaw have mentioned some great points, and just that I think that what I'd actually like to see actually moving forward is, I think what someone mentioned earlier in the conversation is stronger negotiations on players understanding their real worth and saying, look, I want a percentage of sales, or I'll take less active income and I'll up me on the equity based on our ability to win championships or something along those natures. So let's see, that could be maybe the next wave of negotiations for key top players.
On that point that you just mentioned, sorry, P, if you're an agent of an athlete, would you recommend them to do that? Because especially if it's a team sport where there's so many different factors that could cut your cost down. Yeah.
I guess it depends on it comes back down to that leverage, but also I guess what regulations are in place to ensure maybe there's not one particular player in the team that has such a unique contract. But I don't know if Ronaldo was in that position before he moved to Saudi Arabia. I guess because he accepted a 200 million contract, which is effectively active income. Could he have in that negotiated something more of an equity support? Would they have allowed it? I'm not sure. But
just to that point, I think, of course, there are like performance-based bonuses that football players get. There's also in the transfer fees that if, for example, the team that the person joins, especially if it's a young player, 17, they win a title, they have to pay more of the transfer fee to the previous club. So there are bonuses that are paid. There are also probably parts of specific contracts that say, if I help you set a relegation, you get X amount bonus. So there are definitely these things that we're not going to be aware of. But, for example, our works, we get a base salary and most people get a bonus or an annual bonus. I'm sure they have some performance related bonus that they may be eligible for as well.
Yeah, no, but that's still active income, so that's still bonus related. It'll be interesting.
Oh,
I wonder if it would be interesting to have. I mean, these guys we've mentioned that are top 10, they are one of one generational talents. So I don't know if maybe they've had a conversation, you know, like the likes of Rich Paul. Can we get a piece of, you know, part? Is it? I think Michael Jordan did that. I think that's what he's deal with the Washington Wizards. Part owner, part
well,
player.
well, we'll put it this way: if they're doing it, they ain't gonna be talking loud about it because we'll probably be in agreement. Keep it hush hush, because you know
I don't know if
these clubs and these leagues aren't going to be wanting to do this for every single player. So yes, interesting, and I think we're kind of moving, you know, having that segue into sort of future trends. But before that, I think it's very interesting, Joel, you spoke about LeBron James' son, because I think it's exciting as a young player to be, you know, signing 5.6 or 5.9 million deal. But for me, that also brings pressure. Like, for example, Zinedine Zidane's son does not have Zidane on the back of his shirt because he wants to be his own sort of player, not have pressure. Maybe you don't want to headbutt no one. But no, it's just interesting to see the footsteps that they follow, especially when you're a child of a great, and the pressure that can also have, you know, with you. But I think, you know, when we talk about future trends, I think it's interesting to see, because I'll just draw sort of two examples. Social media, I think, now has a huge way to have leverage, as P mentioned. When you look at, for example, the Jake brothers, the Paul brothers, Logan Paul and Jake Paul. These guys started off as YouTubers. One in particular, Logan, got cancelled a couple of years ago for a video that he posted. But look at him now, making millions. These guys, Logan Paul is in McMahon's WWE, jumping off, doing these somersaults and frog splash on all sorts at WrestleMania.
He's cold.
I even watched him. I ain't gonna lie, I watched him. He's in
cold.
WWE, boxing on the side. Jake Paul doing boxing, and he's not bad for what he is. You know, let's keep it real. He's not the best because he's not a natural boxer, but he's not bad. He'll probably wrap me up. I ain't gonna lie, he'll wrap me up. And you know, these guys live in Puerto Rico. You know, they live in tax-free. They live in good life. They're living in some big places. But it's interesting to see how their YouTube presence has been able to allow them to fight big names, renowned names in the world of UFC. Jake Paul fighting Nate Diaz in a couple of months, knocking out some fighters. And you know, we didn't get on to talk about boxing, but that would have been a good topic, you know, to talk about like Floyd Mayweather, Canelo, and all these other up and coming boxers that are, you know, in their prime. You know, because boxing is a very interesting sport of, you know, how they get paid, promotions, etc., prize money, underdog versus the main card. So yeah, it's very interesting to see what the future is going to hold when social media is going to have a huge impact on leverage, on their presence, on their followers, to enable them to not only, you know, have such a huge presence in the world of sport, but also how much money and income they can generate from that.
No, I actually wanted to add. It just came to mind. So that list potentially is incorrect. That top 10 list. I'll tell you why. Because the number one spot is not Cristiano Ronaldo. It's actually a 6 out of 10 solid central defensive midfielder who is reported to be worth around $10 billion. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Oh, I know, Mathieu Flamini.
Mathieu Flamini, sorry.
But sorry. So yeah,
I only say that to say it will always come down to an equity. It will always come down to an equity play. So I mean, for the listeners, he's no longer playing. He started up a biotech company, and reportedly he's worth $10 billion dollars. So, but the key message there I wanted to send was the equity part.
Hey, don't try and say the list is incorrect. It's all talk about highest paid current athletes from 1st of May 2022 to 1st of May 2023. So even, for example, I think it doesn't even capture Canelo's last boxing fight because it was outside of that time frame. But if it was included, I think it would actually jump up to number 3 or 4 or 2. But yeah, don't try and undermine me with my agenda, bro. I see, and I still know who you're talking about as well. Number 16, Arsenal, Mathieu Flamini. Yeah. Okay, sure. Over to you. Future trends. Quick take.
I think just reiterating the points that I mentioned actually just in the previous segment, I think now is the opportunity. It's just only going to get bigger and better. I think the number of opportunities will increase. The amount of money that we see exchanging hands for promotion will also increase. And I think we'll see more sports players taking a more active ownership on their personal brand while they're still playing rather than a post-retirement trend. So yeah, everything's going up.
Cool. Thanks. And Olu, round us out.
Yeah, on my side, in terms of the future trends, I see it. I'm going to say something a little bit more controversial. I see it switching the other way around in the short term. In terms of, I think we're, especially in the top, we're starting to see a lot of players with higher endorsements than salary. I actually think in the next few years it's going to probably switch, and we're going to see more salary. So like Mbappe getting 100 million, I think that's going to go to 150, 200. And the reason that is going to be is because sports is going to become even more globalized, and there's just going to be more revenue generated in there. So you've got technology such as AR, right? So imagine nowadays people want to be in a stadium, they can put on these goggles and they're courtside seat, and they at the NBA final, right? People are going to pay for that, which then will mean these different leagues and whatever will be able to generate even more revenue, which then means they'll be able to offer higher salaries to certain players as well. So that's the trend I think is going to happen on my side.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I definitely would love us to go on longer to talk about the world of boxing, golf, and even tennis. You know, you've seen the long-standing rivalry between Roger Federer and also Rafael Nadal, who said, you know, he looks to retire next year, and of course, also the rise in Djokovic, and then you look at Emma Raducanu, Serena Williams, Venus Williams, etc. You look at all those great tennis players, but unfortunately we don't have that time. But it'll definitely be good to maybe even another future time talk about even the all-time highest athletes as well, retired and active.
Just wanted to mention one quick point. Ollie, you mentioned it earlier, and I think it's a very, very just a small piece to add in. All of this is predicated based on how good your sports agent is, and how better will these sports agents become? How smarter will they become? Because the athletes themselves will only ever have a certain level of IQ. Some are smarter than others, but it will be interesting to see how the sports agency across leagues evolves over time. If they get better, the contracts get better, they get smarter, and athletes get wealthier. So it all depends on if you look at Al Heyman in the boxing world, you know, nobody knows what he looks like. People have hardly heard of him, but he's actually the person that is pulling all the strings. You know, Rich Paul on the NBA side. So it's quite interesting on what happens from that standpoint.
Yeah, and just on that, I don't even think it's about the agents; it's also their advisors. I think there's someone that I think three of us in this podcast follow, a guy based in Atlanta who's been showcasing some athletes in the US who've been screwed over by the advisors and just pocketing millions from them. So I think even when you look at the off-field endorsements, it's where the investments go. And the guy I'm talking about is Rashawn Williams. Anyone who doesn't know him, follow him on Instagram. Great guy. Gives some good tips and lives a good life. Let's put it that way. But it's also who their advisors are, because when it comes to footballers in particular, they have a lot of money and they know that their career doesn't span multi-decades, and therefore they want to put their money to work. And it's always about who is your advisor, who's telling you what to do.
Yeah.
Can they be trusted? We saw that Craig Bellamy went bankrupt. Wes Brown, former Manchester United player, was declared bankrupt. Emmanuel Boe, Arsenal player, different story.
No, he's good. He's good. Trust me, he's good.
Oh, now he is. But yeah, let's just say he went through some personal issues that got him crippled. But yeah, I think we'll stop at that juncture. But thank you all for listening to episode 185 of Take Flight Podcast. We hope you found it enthralling, fascinating, and enriching. And if you want any advice on how to structure an equity sort of deal, go to P. He'll give us some great advice. You don't need an agent, you just need him. But until next time, stay safe, stay well, and God bless. If you have any feedback for us, find us on Instagram, Take Flight Podcast, TikTok, Take Flight Podcast, YouTube, Take Flight Podcast. Our DMs are always open. Peace.
Take off.